This is Arash Adnani from privateplacements.com. I recently had a chance to sit down with Terry Salman. Terry is a true legend in the mining industry. He spent about 22 years as the chairman, president, and CEO of Salman Partners. Salman Partners helped raise over $20 billion for more than 400 companies here in Canada. He's worked with some of the best and biggest names in the industry, guys like Ross Beatty, Robert Friedland, Lucas Lundin. And it's not just his business accomplishments that makes Terry a true legend. It's his sense of civic duty, something that he's done and he's been committed to for his entire career and still is to this day. Terry has served on the Vancouver Public Library Foundation as chair. He's also been the chair of the St. Paul's Hospital Foundation. He sat on the financial advisory board to the World Health Organization, and this is just to name a few. This interview covers a lot, and we really try to touch on most of Terry's career. There's a lot to cover, but we cover things basically from the beginning, where Terry got started, which was with the U.S. Marines, and his time spent at Nesbitt Thomson, and what led him to start Salman Partners from there. We touch on what he looks for when he's backing different entrepreneurs, what he looks for when he's investing in different deals, and really talk about his philosophy on life. If you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur or founder, or you are interested in business, or if you just need some inspiration, you will love this video. I walked away feeling so inspired. I hope you do too. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Mr. Terry Salman. Please enjoy. In your career, you've basically been two places. That's pretty uncommon, right? People move around. What I ask myself is, okay, well, is this just like a generational thing? Is it just like the generation now that feels like they need to move around and always look for a better opportunity? Or is this really unique to Terry, right? And does any of it have to do with your commitment and discipline that you gained from spending years in the Marine Corps and actually being in combat in Vietnam?
I think the Marine Corps is the core of my value system, because they, other than my parents, which were of course paramount, but the Marines taught me that, you know, it's not about you, it's about the Marine Corps, and you're just one part of it. But it's so hard to get that designation, and it's such a sacrifice to be called a U.S. Marine, that when you achieve that, you never forget it. And so loyalty is a big part of it. I mean, you can tell those that picture of that Marine on the right-hand side. He was Secretary of the Navy under Reagan, and he wrote Semper Fidelis, Semper Fi, which means always faithful. It's a Marine Corps thing. Mm-hmm. So, faithful to the organization, faithful to your friends, faithful to the work that you do. A great deal of that, and don't cancel. Marines don't cancel meetings and like I said. You know, you have to be somewhere. You have to be somewhere. Yeah. I was telling my granddaughter the other day, the only thing that I didn't like doing was jumping out of an aircraft on a rope, right? You know, a helicopter. And I said, if I could find a way to go to sick bay on that particular day, I would. But I said, you know, I was trying to explain to her, she has fear of, you know, certain ending up in bad places skiing, even though she was a very good skier. But I was trying to tell her that I had the same phobia, but in the Marines, but I got over it. Yeah. So it was sort of a interesting discussion with a 10-year-old.
Do you almost find it, because with that experience, do you almost find it that it's unrelatable with some of the things that you might see as far as behavior from other people that you come across in work or life, but you almost have to catch yourself where it's like, okay, well, hold on a second, they weren't in the Marines, so they're not wired like I am, right?
Well, I don't know about wise, it's just a different experience that taught you. Marines take care, they do things like have a lifelong impact. Mm-hmm. Like they always go back and get their dead, even though there's a risk that they'll get shot themselves. That's a profound way of teaching you loyalty. Mm-hmm. So if you have that experience and you see people acting up or haven't had that discipline, it's really hard to to tell them that, you should do this and do that. It's just an experience that helped me a lot through my life.
Yeah.
And you see people, giving back is, the reason for me, what's the meaning of life? You can collect things, you can have cars, you can have planes, you can have, but what can you do with your life that makes a difference? You can't be just focused on yourself. You got to, in my view, a friend of mine who just died, he dedicated 25% of his life to civic activities. Mm-hmm. I don't know what percentage I spent, but I'm always believing in a new way. My New Year's motto this year, which I've rarely told anybody, is to help as many people as possible.
Right.
In whatever way possible. Because, how many years do I have left? 5, 6, 10, whatever. So for me, it's important to do that. In business, in charity work, it's something I want to do.
So let's talk about that civic duty, because you spent 16 years as chair of the Vancouver Public Library Foundation, 8 years as chairman of the St. Paul's Hospital Foundation, and these are, Vancouver and BC landmarks, right? So, you just said you don't know what the percentage is that you've spent, but those were just two things out of a whole page here of community involvement that you spend time on. So obviously it's a high percentage. Where does that, you just explained where that sense of duty comes from, but with your approach, it hasn't just been a little bit here, a little bit there. It's been a true commitment where it's a fixed aspect of your daily life. How do you explain that, and where does that come from?
I think my sense of civic duty came as a result of watching other people who made a difference, like Mr. Louis at London Drugs. Mm-hmm. Why would a man so successful as him spend so much time on helping St. Paul's Hospital, which he did? And so I said, well, if Mr. Louis can do it, maybe I can learn something from this experience. So I picked up on other people like him who really wanted to make a difference and had a civic duty that I hadn't thought of. So watching him, I got involved. And because of that, somebody who was aware of what I did at St. Paul's, they asked me to help the Vancouver Library years later. And here again, I did that because libraries are good things. The more people read, the better off we are. And so there's a movement in some circles to do away with libraries, but libraries are a living thing, and it's people from all walks of life benefit from libraries. So I thought, yeah, I can get involved in this. But it was a struggle because, we have civic-minded governments. Some governments are pro-business, others are not. And so we had struggles in early years getting recognition, and why should people donate to a library was a common question when in fact it should be paid from your tax base. And so I said, whatever, there are reasons for incremental funding, and the benefits to children, to people who can barely walk. If you go to that Carnegie branch, you see the East Asian and Asian cultured people waiting in line for there's Chinese periodicals that they read there daily in a small little library that was once a major library, a small section of that. And sometimes they get ripped off by people when they wait in line because that's a tough neighborhood. And so think about how those periodicals get worn and used by these wonderful people who have access to this library free, and they take a chance by waiting in line with somebody bothering them and trying to pickpocket them or whatever. Mm-hmm. So the small amount of funding or something like that goes a long way. So they're not all central libraries. They're in some remote places or less traveled places, more difficult places. And it makes a difference. On the other hand, you know, I'm involved in BCIT too, because I have an honorary degree from there, and I like the fact that they've never asked for, none of those organizations that I've been involved with had foundations when I started, or they just had a very small one. St. Paul's, BCIT did, St. Paul's, and the Vancouver Public Library Foundation did, but small. So we're treading on new ground, and now they're both very successful, hugely successful, and they help many, many people from all walks of life. So immigrants, non-immigrants, everybody's an immigrant in some way or another. So, you know, these institutions help a lot of people. So, but I like grassroots as well. I mean, I have a small foundation called Essential Needs Foundation, and we show up on their webs of the Veterans Transition Network as one of their major donors. The number of hours we help for treatment for people who suffer from PTSD and other issues from military background. And yet we show up with Boeing, London Drugs, and other places because we've made that a focus. We also, you know, for a long time gave food to the downtown east side. So there's many ways to become involved. It doesn't have to be large entities. It can be. So why do I do it? Because I get huge satisfaction doing that. It makes a difference, and I feel good about doing that. It's just one of these. I feel you know, it goes a long way. A small amount of money goes a long way.
What advice do you have? So you know, with a lot of times there's people in business, right, and they're recognized as business leaders, and so they're approached a lot, right, to help with different causes and foundations. What advice do you have for younger people that don't have that profile yet, right, where they get approached, and let's say they still want to help and support? What's the best way for them to get involved? You know, for example, like have you ever given advice to your grandkids or even your own kids about how to get started, get your foot in the door, and something small can eventually, no, with civic duty, with getting involved with causes in the community?
I think the best way is to get on, be part of a committee, some sort of committee that does charity work. There's all kinds of opportunities for small events that you can partner with. Smaller entities need people who are well educated to be on their boards, make a commitment. So as a board member, as a volunteer, there's huge opportunities. Not so much, I wouldn't do it because it helps your resume. Do it because it'll help you be a better business person.
Right.
You know, because you will see many different aspects of life that will help you in business, I think.
So this is actually a good transition going into business. So a lot of people know you as Terry Salman from Salman Partners, the investor, and we're going to get into that later on, but you're also a businessman. You spent 20 years with Nesbitt Thomson. You started out as a senior analyst and worked your way up to executive vice president. And having spent 20 years, started as, you know, not at the bottom, but working your way up to EVP is very significant. Tell us, from your experience as a businessman, what were the main lessons learned that allowed you to then go off and start your own business in Salman Partners? And what were the key takeaways in being able to do that?
I think the key takeaways were I had mentors. I had people that helped me. The man who's one of my closest friends, Brian Ani, was the chairman of Nesbitt Thomson, and he gave me an opportunity. He's the only one that would see me on a Saturday. Everybody else in the investment business, which when I was going to graduate school in Connecticut, wanted to see me during the week. But I didn't want to miss a class. I didn't want to take off school and go up to Montreal or Toronto. So if you work with good people and have, that'll create opportunities. And I was blessed by having somebody who believed in me. And his comment to me was, this Brian Ani I'm talking about, if I can't hire a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who's a Canadian, a Vietnam veteran, he said, what good am I? This guy did the deal with the Bank of Montreal, where we sold Nesbitt Thomson to Bank of Montreal, created 50 millionaires in the 70s, in the 90s. And then he went on to become a founding director of Constellation Software. It's $1,000 stock.
Yeah. So,
but he was very humble, didn't really focus on himself, but he created opportunities. If you can associate yourself with people like that, which I still do actually, it just enriched my life. So the more successful I was in business, the more of an opportunity I had to help these charities that I'm involved in.
Right, and it's all connected.
They work together.
Yeah. So that, and we're going to jump around, right? Because there isn't everything like we're saying is connected. This idea of people, right? Surrounding yourself with the right people. It also comes into play in your philosophy as an investor, in backing the right people, right? And I think the number is you guys at Salman Partners did over $20 billion of financings that you were either behind or acted on. And when I look at the list of companies that you guys supported, it's like a greatest hits of Canadian mining deals and mining leaders. And from guys like Ross Speedy to Lucas Lundin to the who's who of the mining business. What do you see in people when you're at that point where you have to make a decision in whether you want to get involved or not? And are there common characteristics that you see in guys like that and leaders like that that or are kind of a sign for you to get involved in and help support them?
Yes. People who, one characteristic I look for is who are the people involved in these companies? Are they committed to the long term? Are they going to be an investor when I'm an investor? Are they going to leave, sell the company over time? But are they going to over duration? Are they going to be with this company for a long period of time? Mm-hmm. Because it takes years to build a public company, a successful public company. And those who stay with it from a junior mining company, for example, till the end are very, very few. And those that have been very, very successful, and they're the Ross Beatties, the Robert Friedlands, these kind of people have one common characteristic. They basically leave when you leave. And that's a comforting thing, and they're interested in building. And they nurture, they in spite of the times, they don't really move in circles that are short term, mm-hmm. very long term. They surround themselves with very good, solid technical people. They have good governance and financial skills in their organization. They don't constantly create new public companies or private companies. and they stick to their knitting. If they're a geologist, the most successful ones, if they're a geologist, like take a look at Ross Beatty, he sold when copper, porphyry copper wasn't in vogue, he was acquiring them. He wasn't going to develop them, but he's going to move them along geologically, drill as much as he can, prove up a significant resource, and then sell it. He did this Northern Peru Copper, Global Copper. He never wanted to be an operator in these companies, but he took the opportunity of looking at these things when no one else did. And so, and there are a number of people like him, and Rui Fang at Silvercorp is John McCluskey at Alamos. These are all people that I was associated with from a very, very early stage in their companies. And their work ethic, their dedication, their belief in going beyond the short-term volatility in the market, but looking longer term. Bob Quartermain, when Rick Rule invested in and Ross Beatty invested in Silver Standard, it was a penny stock. He came to me with all these assets in the silver space. My analyst looked at it and said, well, silver's $7, none of them are economic. I said, I know, but they will be someday. He had the vision to keep acquiring these assets, and was a great storyteller, could articulate, and it became, the stock has never recovered to where it was. It went from nothing to over $40. So I learned from these things. I learned from people like that because they believe in themselves, and so it was a life lesson for me. So I try to look at these kind of people that have been very successful, and there's a lot of young people that, like Amir, for example, and he's constantly believes, in spite of the market, in what he's doing, and he doesn't deviate from what he's doing. He has a plan, and he's constantly articulating, and all the good ones. Robert Friedland is enormously successful, but what he's passionate about is what he actually believes in his companies, and you can't, in spite of the markets. And so we have that kind of upside with somebody who has that kind of passion. It generally turns out to be a really good investment, but they're very hard to find.
Yeah.
Incredibly hard to find. And if you find one of those every 2-3 years, you're lucky.
Yeah. And when you do, you stick with them and you support them all the way.
Yes.
So how did you find them, and how do you find them? How do you find them now? Are you? You must get approached a lot, right? But what's always been successful for you in finding these, let's say, the next generation of the next Ross Beatty, the next Robert Friedland?
Some I've missed, like Sean Rosen. There's a relatively newcomer. When these other companies that I talked about weren't, he wasn't around in those cases. We talked about Amir. We've talked about, what Stephen Dean did with Atlantis Gold. He had difficulty raising money, but he believed in what he did, and that's one I missed, but I should have looked closer. And these are a bit younger generation, and so there's a number. I look for a good grade. I look for good management who are going to stick with it for a long period of time. I look at those who have the respect of others, and people want to work for them. I look for these characteristics, and I want to make sure that they're not doing too many things in the public space, because it's really hard to focus on a multitude of companies, because inevitably if you have too many companies under your wing, they won't all work out.
Yeah.
So you want to, so Right now, I'm particularly excited about gold because I think it has an incredible future because of the uncertainty in the world that we're seeing now.
Yeah.
At some point, the U.S. dollar will correct when it's less of a safe haven. And you know, gold has a role that we haven't seen in a long time, in my view. So I like the fact that it's moving up slowly, not.
So it's moving up in a healthy way.
Yes, a healthy way to reflect the uncertainty and the relative store of value that it has vis-a-vis.
So let me ask you that actually about gold, because it's becoming, with the recent rise in gold prices, it's becoming mainstream now, right? And I usually notice based on what happens with so-called pundits, right? All of a sudden, everyone's a gold expert and everyone's publishing, you know, gold information and gold investing ideas. When a sector gets hot, okay, like gold is right now, as an investor, do you look at a volume approach where it's, okay, you know what, let's put some money into a lot of different deals, right? Kind of like the Eric Sprott model, maybe?
Yes.
Or is it more of the, hey, you know what, I know who the guys I like or who the leaders I like are, and I'm just going to stay with them and ride this out? Or does it change?
I've changed somewhat. In a sense, I'm trying to identify earlier stage companies as one part of my very small portion of what I'd like to invest in. But I think we live in a, you know, there's not too many mines being created, so exploration is a real key here. And so I think being selective in a number of exploration stories I've been doing lately, and I've had some success in it, and I feel comfortable in that space. I think we do have a much more better precious metals market, and I think we have some serious people that are on the ground looking at some very good projects, and some of the results are promising. I said, you know, when you look at New Pacific, where I was an advisor to an investor, it went from nothing to a market cap of almost $900 million that originally was started with 2 drill holes.
And so with discovery, it's obviously a risky game,
Yes.
and a lot of people shy away from it because of how speculative it can be. Do you have a methodology where it gives you a certain level of certainty or comfort? You know, like for example, like you said, grades are really important too.
Location.
Location. Okay. What else?
The country.
So high risk, low risk. Do you like safer jurisdictions?
You know, I like moderate risk jurisdictions. I think there's some major discoveries that have happened in Africa. Not everybody is interested in Africa, but I think there's some real opportunities. I think in Canada, certain parts of Canada.
Sure, yeah. Are there jurisdictions you don't like, either because it's overly regulated or it's just too high risk?
I don't. I'm comfortable with Russia, for example. Not because I have anything. It's just a difficult.
Lack of transparency with.
Yeah, I mean, there's much better, more places more comfortable that I feel more comfortable with, like in Australia, Canada, for sure.
So you mentioned something about how a CEO or founder's focus is so important, right? And in this business, being that it's so cyclical, what we've seen from the ones that are focused is that they're almost more active during a bear market, whether it's acquiring cheaper assets or just making more favorable deals than in the bull market. And so for you personally, do you have an approach where if there's a sector or a commodity that's down, right, like uranium, for example, right? Do you have a philosophy or an approach where it addresses the timing of it, right? So it's down right now, and sure, okay, prices are down, so it's a good buy. But how long do you hold for it, right? And could that money be deployed towards other investments where there's more movement and more activity?
Well, I think both, a little bit of both. I think in the mining space, I look for good assets that I can acquire at an entry level, very, very cheap, or attractive pricing. And I think that's really crucial to most investing. But then on the other hand, you're right, if you're in a sector that is dormant for an awful long time, it's hard to be patient for most of us, even though I generally take a long-term view of whatever I invest in. So I think it's crucial that, as I said, I focus with the right people, really good property, in a right address that has potential. It doesn't really have to have much drilling or anything on it, but something that's been overlooked in the past. But then on the other hand, there's an old adage, you find gold and silver where somebody else did. And that was the case in Bolivia. The Spanish had been there for 100 years, from 1500 to 1600. So when I saw all these old workings, I felt really comfortable with the environment. That why were they there 100 years? And when I saw buildings in the background that were crumbling down, I said, well, what's in the middle? And it was something called a bank, and they made currency there. So the atmosphere, the surrounding geology and geography was compelling to look further. It's always about looking further in the mining business. So if you I looked at something in South America the other day that is overlooked, perhaps, surrounded by major mines. So I like the possibility of finding something significant, because the majors aren't finding new assets. Somebody else is. So, but buying, to answer your question, buying things that are out of vogue, one thing that's inevitable, every commodity has a cycle. So buying at the right time in the cycle is really wise. But then on the other hand, gold is on an upswing here, and there's some opportunities to participate in that upswing by discoveries. And so I'm just trying to find the right people with a really good asset base that can take it to the next level and aren't focused on too many things at once and won't constantly dilute themselves to the point where it doesn't make sense. The best stories are those that don't issue a lot of stock. They're very careful because they don't like dilution. They only do it when they have to, and when they need to move a project along. They're not serial issuers of paper. I think that's a really something to avoid. Companies that issue too many new issues consistently.
Is there, as far as obviously with cap structure, you want something that's healthy with good insider ownership from management, yes, and you want people to have skin in the game. With looking at, let's say, exploration companies or companies that are in the business of making discoveries, are there companies that you're looking at or you're behind or you're involved with now that you like, that you care to share with us? Are there management teams that you like that you've worked with in the past that really excel in the business of discoveries?
I mean, I like Ivanhoe Mines because it's cheap. has a number of world-class deposits, some of the best grades of copper in the world. Hasn't been really doing much in the marketplace, incredibly undervalued. I like Equinox. Mm-hmm. I think it's very interesting. I like Liberty. It looks like a really major discovery. I missed it, but I like it. I'm watching it. Mm-hmm. I think it's attractive. I think, I'm just trying to think, I think Silvercorp is incredibly cheap. The last couple of weeks it took a 20% hit in its market price. I don't know why. Some of it could be the coronavirus, some of it could be China, whatever, but it's one of the most profitable mining companies in the world. And and I'm looking at that as a entry level, another position in something that I think I've financed and I've invested in, and it's dropped significantly.
Yeah.
I like gold mining because Amir doesn't create flavor of the month. You know, he's building ounces in the ground. He's not getting the kind of recognition that he deserves for what he's doing, but the asset base is growing. And the fact of the matter is, when you have somebody like Amir as a spokesman, you can't go wrong. So it hasn't really realized its value, but it will. It will. Don't forget, it was a much higher stock price recently. Really good board, really good governance, and it will realize its value. And he's young enough to really run with it.
I guess the one great thing right now is that even though gold's been going up, a lot of these companies that you mentioned are still bargains, yes. Right? And so you're able to acquire proven companies and proven management teams really on the cheap, right? So you don't even have to go out of your way to overextend yourself and trying to find new deals, which is really exciting for investors. How would you? We have a lot of investors that aren't used to looking at mining deals, right? Or they haven't yet, right? What's Terry Salman's let's say pitch on why mining, right? Why investing in mining is good, it's important, and maybe you can also touch on one of the things that I know keeps a lot of people away from investing in mining is because they think it's bad for the environment or they don't like the practices. As someone who's been in the business long enough, who I know has a very strong opinion on this sort of thing, how would you address that?
I think, one of my closest friends is Ross Beatty, and he's a huge environmentalist in terms of commitment to the environment. Mm-hmm. Huge. So, and there's an example. Not too many mining people, make that kind of commitment. But inevitably, the Canadian industry is second to none in terms of quality of concern about the environment. So we as Canadians don't recognize that enough.
Right.
But for me, it comes from my background. My father was a mining engineer. And at my daughter's wedding, one of his students, my father passed away many years ago, one of his students was a professor at UBC who recently passed away. So he showed up at my daughter's wedding with two gifts of the mining industry. One was a native copper which my father believed in, from Michigan, almost pure copper. And then a feldspar, which is waste rock, beautiful stone. And his point was to my daughter, and he said this at her wedding, he said he believed in the environment, but also the value of waste rock. And one of his students was the superintendent of Brenda Mines. You drive up to the Okanagan, you see how that's been reclaimed, and it looks all grass and so forth. It doesn't look like there was ever a mine there. Mm-hmm. The guy who ran that was a student of my father's at McGill. He barely made the cutoff at McGill. And the only reason he did is my father said, yeah, he stays, when other professors wanted to move on. He became superintendent of Brenda. If you look at Brenda today, it's been totally reclaimed, and it looks amazing. So you mine it environmentally safely. You do reclamation after, restore it to where it was, and then extract it in a really safe way. Because with the population growth we've got in the world today, we need these chemicals, these resources. We can't live without them, even in climate change. You're going to need more batteries. You're going to need more electric cars, and you're going to need more lithium. You're going to need more silver. You're going to need more gold, because that's all part of making the environment. Aircraft, you want them safer, you want them cleaner. You're going to have to use these copper, silver, platinum, palladium, because not enough people are mining for them. And more addresses, because they're becoming much more environmentally focused, people aren't doing it anymore. I heard on the news, on the CBC program, As It Happens, they had a precision drilling. They moved to the United States. But he was pointing out to Ottawa many times, he said, in this interview, he said, we are the most safest, highest standard of protection of the environment in the oil business in the world. Mm-hmm. He's talking about Canada. He said, but nobody cares. So he moved his operations to Houston. So where his budget is much more, we're spending much more, get much more of an opportunity for him. So we lost another company, and we didn't have to do that. We could have embraced what we have as the strongest conditions that we have for governance and practice in mining, practice of mining in the world in this country. And that's why so many of these companies that we finance have operations all over the world. The Canadian standards are very high. So we miss an opportunity if we don't recognize that, and the politicians don't do enough of that, in my view.
That's really well put, and yeah, you're right. The Canadian standard seems to be the highest, and unfortunately within Canada we sometimes don't acknowledge that. I have a question for you, and this is because of what we're doing with privateplacements.com, which is the idea with the website and the platform was to really empower investors, right? What we're doing is aggregating all the data and simplifying it for the investors, saving them time. As a result, we're hoping that investors or people that are thinking about investing can use the data to discover opportunities. As someone who's been involved with 20 billion plus dollars of financings. Why do you think it's important to look at private placements as a form of investment?
I think it's very, very important, and your website, is beautiful. It's very clean, very understandable. When you've got people like Rick Rule and Eric Sprott and Ross Beatty investing in a broad spectrum of this and encouraging people to invest in private placements, particularly in the mining space, it's really important to have a platform where you can see it all at once. And what they're investing by example, and others will follow, because if they're doing it and they're recommending it, there'll be more of it, and opportunities for many of us to look at new opportunities that come in the door, all of which show up on your website. So I spend more time looking at brand new companies than I ever have had. In fact, even creating one of our own,
right.
Because it encourages people to look at an industry in a positive way that has been. And listen, if you make money in a private placement, you'll have a positive view of the mining industry. If you lose money, you won't. And those who are anti-mining will obviously not invest in mining companies. But more and more generalists are looking at the same, maybe we should have a small amount in this mining space. And so all of a sudden you attend these conferences and there's more people than you used to see in the past.
Sure, yeah.
So the platform that you have, the format is excellent. And it just, I look at it and say, I didn't know that company. Maybe I should call them. And that's what I do.
That's
or
perfect.
My assistant does.
I didn't know you were doing that, but that's
no, we call up and say, this looks interesting. And somebody will say, somebody will call me and they say there's good grades there. So I'll dig in further, we'll look at the material, and so that's how you find good ideas.
It's good lead generation for investors like yourself that need to look at a large amount of deals and don't want to waste too much time doing it.
And we have people like Rick Rule investing in these. These are people who made an awful, Ross Beatty, Robert Frieden, made a lot of money in transactions. So they're not promoting me to look at it. I'm just looking at things.
Sure, yeah. So why invest in a private placement versus just buying in the open market? And
that's a very good question.
I know it's an obvious answer for you, but for a lot of people it might not be.
I think the private placements that are the negative, and people should be aware of this, really, really important. Private placements are 4 months hold. So you're investing in a private company.
It's a 4-month commitment.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I think it's a good thing to do both. Buy some of the free trading and invest in a private placement. But don't exclusively just invest in private placements, because there have been times when you've been locked in for a long period of time and the stock price disappears while you're waiting. So I think it's wise to do a little bit of both. And if you missed a good deal that you couldn't, and that happens to me all the time, I say, okay, maybe I'll buy a little bit to see what happens.
Right.
See how it performs.
Right.
And sometimes lately I've been successful because there have been a lot of good stories, but there's a downside to this. You get into a bad market and you're locked in. It's sort of like buying pre-sales on real estate. It's fine to buy them when the market's going up, but when you're committed and the market's going down,
you just want out of that thing.
Yeah, you want out of that thing. And I have, so I think you have to be very, very. I think you do both. Invest in liquid stocks, or even not liquid. Take positions, diversify a little bit. It's very important.
Okay, so the 4-month hold could be a negative, but what are some positives for investing in private placements? Like obviously warrants, sometimes a discount in the market.
It's usually the warrants or half a warrant that you get that's a sweetener.
Yeah.
And that's really valuable because warrants have, especially long life warrants. Everybody wants 5-year warrants. But remember, there's this flip side to that too. If there's too many warrants outstanding, it's too much dilution.
Right.
So, get back to my discussion about dilution. So I like private placements. I think they're a great way to go, but make sure that the ones you're buying, people aren't constantly cranking out new issues.
Right.
And it's their focus.
Right.
Not 2 or 3 different ones or 5 different. It's fine to have 2 different companies in different industries, but remember the ability to manage a company past 2 is quite limited. So unless you have really good people, there's only so many hours in a day.
Sure, yeah. So, okay, so the themes so far have been focus. Okay, focus is very important. And I think focus and discipline kind of go hand in hand,
Yes.
right? One other one has been people, right? Surrounding yourself with good people, whether that's your team or mentors. I'm very lucky because of the work we do with privateplacements.com and Blender. I'm able to meet and become friends with great people such as yourself, and I see the value in it. It's like a form of education, being able to spend time with someone who's done things that you're striving to do, right? Not everyone is lucky to be in that position where they can easily pick up the phone and call someone like yourself or Rick Rule. But they should have the same luxury, right, of surrounding themselves with good people. Do you have any thoughts on how someone can go about doing that if someone's unproven and let's say they don't have anything to provide? Let's say someone new comes along and they want to spend and learn from you, but they don't have anything to offer as far as they don't have a business you can invest in. What would you recommend they do? Like, what are some qualities they can demonstrate so someone who values their time will look at them and say, you know what, I'm going to give this person my Saturdays like your mentor did?
I had a breakfast in Whistler the other day with a friend of mine who owns a private business. I'm so impressed with what she's done with that private business all by herself. She bought an existing business by somebody else, and she's looking at expanding, and that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And she's created a high margin business, one of the most unique stores in Whistler, and it's constantly profitable. What are the characteristics? Why was she successful? Why is she successful? It's her entire focus. That's what she does. She's there all the time. She's on top of it. She hires good people, and she pays her taxes, and she just is committed to growing this, doing what good people do. She stays with a long period of time. She's not an absentee owner, and she's building a business.
Yeah. So it's the little things that get overlooked.
Yes.
Kind of like for lack of better terms, the boring stuff, right? It's not the flashy, exciting stuff, but the fundamentals, let's say, that get overlooked.
Yeah, and they have the big thing is, from a public company, but do they have the ability to get past the public market cap of anywhere from 5 to 50 million? Do they have the ability to get beyond that? Mm-hmm. And they won't have that ability if they're constantly creating new companies or if they're constantly diluting. Take a look at BT Gold. I mean, I know Clyde, but I've never done any business with him. But his focus is B2 Gold.
Yeah.
I never hear of him in anything else. But I admire somebody building a gold company, and he's done it before. Yeah. He's totally committed. People criticize, the way he's people do things, but he's constantly there. He believes in what he does, and Nolan Watson at Sandstorm. You know, there's many examples of that. But of those private placements that show up on your privateplacements.com,
Yeah.
going through all of those, very few of them will be successful.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
So I'm trying to find. I don't know what percentage it is. Is it 10%?
I think it's probably less. But it's also how we define success as far as the growth or the value created at shares. But I'm actually laughing because you mentioned Clive, and in the interview we did with Rick Rule, we're talking about the same thing about people that are obsessed with their business, and Rick said, you know, like take Clive for example. You could say, "Hey Clive, it's a nice day, isn't it?" And Clive said, "Yeah, it's a nice day to buy some B2 gold." So you know, always having the deal you're working on, it's always in front of you, right? It's always your focus, and nothing else matters if it's a good day or a bad day. It's what you're grinding on.
You take a look at this young friend of mine, Scott Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
He invests in early stage companies, but he runs a conference. He constantly gives an opportunity to people to present their story.
Yeah.
At a very early stage. That's all he does is early stage, but he does it well. So following a guy like that, which I tend to do, is not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
So, you know, so here again, go back to people. But of that list of private placements, very few of them will be successful. Good geology, but if they're constantly creating private placements, you want to be leery of that.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes with a lot of these financings, it's not, you know, the use of proceeds. It's, you know, based on the amount and the cap structure, you can tell it's to keep the office lights on and maybe pay for some Wi-Fi. But I think you're absolutely right. I think understanding how to source the data so that you're finding the quality ones is the trick, and sometimes following the people that have had success in the past as almost as a filter, it's not a bad idea.
There's a Marine Corps slogan that constantly shows up. The Marines are looking for a few good men. They advertise that, right?
Yeah.
The Marine Corps, and they constantly say that. The word is few, right?
Yeah.
They're looking for a few good men.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, they want the best.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with these private placements. We're looking for a few good
We're
investments.
looking for a few good investments.
It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, so if it's work for the Marine, then it should probably work for us as well. That's not a bad idea. This is great. We've touched on everything we wanted to talk about. Is there any final words of advice, whether it's in business, investing, civic duty, life, family?
Just try to do more with your life. Don't get in a rut. Try to get out. We all get in ruts. Mm-hmm. Try to move beyond that. Try to, you know, build something, however small it is, and give back. And constantly give back. Don't worry about giving back. And ask, you know, I ask people all the time to give back. 90% of them turn me down.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
It's 10%. It's the few, good ones you're looking for.
Yeah, just and be thankful. You know, we live in an amazing country. We got to go beyond the short-term problems that we have, and we have many. To you know, it's one of the better places to live. We are fortunate, and we have a rule of law country, although it's being tested at the moment. Mm-hmm. You know, my take on it is don't be satisfied with just the status quo.
Yeah. Push the limit.
Yeah.
Thank you from all of us, and thank you from everyone that's going to watch this.